From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Welcome, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Aaliyah Andres, and here are your news updates to 12 o'clock. Beginning with Metro Vancouver, the man in connection to Carson Cremini's death, who was a minor at the time of the incident, pleaded guilty Thursday morning to manslaughter and will be sentenced. The 14-year-old who died in 2019 after being given illicit drugs at a Walnut Grove skate park, and after videos were posted to social media of the teen having medical distress while bystanders laughed and mocked him. Before Thursday's sentencing, the defense explained to the court the young man has since quit dealing drugs and has been employed for 3 years. The Crown has asked for 2 years in prison, followed by 1 year of probation, while the defense is asking for 12 to 18 months in custody, followed by a probationary period. A recent study has shown that those incarcerated around the time of COVID-19 were at far greater risk of an overdose death. Our BCIT reporter Jocelyn Chappelle has more on what these researchers say factored into these findings.
Those that were in prison for any amount of time between 2015 to 2020 saw a 50% risk increase to toxic opioid-related deaths at the start of the pandemic. Researchers say there was a 30% reduction of people in prisons during this time to combat COVID spreading in facilities. However, this is one of the factors as to why deaths saw a massive jump. Following releases, the study says worsening mental health, reductions in resources due to pandemic response, and border restrictions, which contributed to a more dangerous and unregulated drug market, were also factors to their results. Jocelyn Chappelle, 1680 The Crow.
And Jocelyn joins us now over the phone. Jocelyn, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly, Aaliyah.
Okay, wonderful. Jocelyn, what are the researchers suggesting as next steps to address this situation?
Aaliyah, the researchers suggest implementing more training and resources for people who use drugs, such as drug checking services, increased availability of supervised consumption settings, and greater access to evidence-based treatment, especially considering those who have been incarcerated.
And what do they say are the additional barriers that this group faces?
They say individuals transitioning from prison to the community face multiple challenges, including a lack of healthcare, criminal record-related limitations to employment, a lack of affordable housing and transportation, and difficulty navigating the complex system of government and community-based services, which have all been identified as some of the persisting factors to overdose-related deaths. Back to you, Aaliyah.
All right. Thank you, Jocelyn. That was great to talk to you. That was BCIT reporter Jocelyn Chappelle with that story. Moving on, police in Vancouver say they have arrested 2 people and executed search warrants at the offices of Drug User Liberation Front, an activist group that says it operates a compassion club for distributing drugs. Solicitor General Mike Farnworth supports the arrest following a police investigation. He says the government canceled the contract that saw Vancouver Coastal Health provide funding to the society.
Yes, people who engage in breaking the law can expect there to be consequences. As police have said, they support progressive policies. They recognize the toxic drug crisis, but at the same time, people who engage in illegal activity, particularly in this case, the contract was for the testing of drugs, not for purchasing of illegal drugs.
Additionally, opposition BC United leader Kevin Falcon accused the government in the legislature today of supporting a group with taxpayer dollars that put police and the public at risk by buying illegal drugs from organized crime. Transit fares could be increasing. The company is facing a projected deficit of $4.7 billion within the next decade. Our BCIT reporter Philip Kovacevic has the details on what this means for riders and services.
The COVID-19 pandemic spelled a significant loss for TransLink. The lockdowns dramatically reduced riders on every form of public transportation. The resulting fall in usage considerably lowered the company's revenue. This, combined with future costs and expected revenue, caused the deficit in their financial projections over the next 10 years. While it may be a prediction, this loss is expected if nothing changes within the years to come. This may spell cutbacks in TransLink services as well. Philip Kovacevic, 1680 The Crow.
Data from ICBC says that for the past 5 years, there have been an average of 22 crashes that cause injury and death per day on Vancouver streets. City Councillor Christine Boyle wants to triple the number of speed and red light cameras at the city's intersections in an attempt to do more to prevent fatal crashes. Boyle says there is already she says she wants to add 107 cameras at dangerous intersections and that there are already 43 cameras placed throughout the city that have been proven to be a cost-effective way of improving safety. Focusing down below the border, authorities say that at least 27 people have died after Hurricane Otis slammed into Mexico's Pacific coast. Reporter Rita Foley from the Associated Press tells the destruction has left thousands displaced.
More than a day after the monster hurricane blew ashore in Acapulco, thousands of residents have wrecked homes with no electricity. The destruction so complete that not a single power line pole remains standing in the impact zone, according to the president. Many of the once sleek beachfront hotels in Acapulco look like shells. There's frustration with the government's response. 10,000 military troops have been sent to the area, but they don't have the tools to clean the tons of mud and fallen trees from the streets. Hundreds of trucks from the government electricity company arrived, but didn't seem to know how to restore power, with downed electricity lines lying in feet of mud and water. I'm Rita Foley.
And now some music mixed with a blast from the past. The last new Beatles song is coming out next week, 60 years after Beatlemania rocked the world. Artificial intelligence has enabled the release, which is titled Now and Then. Reporter Margie Saraletta from the Associated Press has more details.
The same batch of John Lennon demos that led to the 1996 songs Real Love and Free as a Bird formed the foundation of the new song Now and Then. Film director Peter Jackson used artificial intelligence to isolate Lennon's vocal. Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr finished the track with a guitar part from the late George Harrison.
Love, love me do.
Now and Then comes out Thursday, paired with the song Love Me Do, the first Beatles single released in England in 1962. A 12-minute film about the new recording will come out on Wednesday. I'm Margie Zaraletta.
The first Beatles song debuted in 1962, and band members Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr are in their 80s. Now for some sports news. Abbotsford Canucks prospect Vasily Podkolzin was taken off the ice on a stretcher after landing on his head during their game against the Colorado Eagles last night. The team posting to X yesterday evening, Vasily is continuing to be thoroughly assessed by physicians as a precaution, but since exiting the ice, he has continued to be alert and responsive. Podkolzin also posting a picture to Instagram yesterday from a hospital bed with the caption, "All good, no worries." The Abbey Canucks did take home a victory, winning 5-2. The Vancouver Whitecaps have announced over 20,000 tickets have been sold for the MLS Cup playoffs against Los Angeles on November 5th. Whitecaps FC entered the playoffs after finishing in sixth place in the Western Conference with 48 points. Whitecaps FC Chief Executive Axel Schuster said, "Last week in our regular season finale against LAFC, we had our largest crowd in over 4 years, and there is an incredible buzz around the club as we prepare for the playoffs." The Toronto Raptors took home a win at their first game of the season against the Minnesota Timberwolves yesterday night. It was also the first NBA coaching win for Toronto's new head coach, Darko Rajakovic. Newcomer Dennis Schroeder had 22 points with 7 assists. Schroeder became the first player to score over 20 points in his Raptors debut since Kawhi Leonard, who had 24 to kick off the Toronto's championship, winning the 2018 to 2019 season.
I'm just glad to get a W. We try to create that one championship 2019. We just try to get that winning culture back on our side, and I think Darko been doing a great job since training camp.
Schroeder signed with Toronto as a free agent in July. And for something a little more unconventional to do with sports, a group in Florida are organizing the first ever Florida Man Games for next February. The sports outline a variety of physically demanding athletics that are often associated with the state. Jennifer King from the Associated Press explains how locals say it will be the most insane athletic showdown on earth.
The St. Johns County media outlet The 904 Now is behind the games planned for February. Competitions will be themed around the beer-loving, gun and gator-owning, mullet-wearing phenomenon known as Florida Man, poking fun at the state's reputation for producing strange news stories. Among the contests, the evading arrest obstacle course, beer belly wrestling, and a Category 5 cash grab in a wind-blowing booth. The Florida Man legend lives on, but Freddie Campion, who popularized the concept as the founder of Florida Man, an account on Twitter with the tagline, "Real-life stories of the world's worst superhero," told the Washington Post he retired the account in 2019, in part because of the moral implications of making callous jokes online about vulnerable people. I'm Jennifer King.
And moving into our weather in Vancouver, we saw some frost on the top of cars this morning, reaching negative temperatures overnight. It is 7 degrees currently, and the sun is shining, and we're going to see this sun progress over the weekend. And good news for anyone heading to trick or treat on Tuesday, it is supposed to stay sunny with a high of 11 degrees. And those were the news headlines to 12 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Aaliyah Andres. Stay tuned for updates from Leon Higgs at 12:30. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
On Wednesday, October 18th, environmental groups challenged the federal environment minister in court after he waited 8 months to issue protections to BC's endangered northern spotted owl.
Now, if you're already a little lost, you're not the only one. Today, we're going to discuss why this happened and what it means for our province's endangered species moving forward.
Welcome to Into the Wild. I'm your co-host, Jocelyn Chappelle.
And I'm your other co-host, Sonia Kutenbrauer. There's a lot to talk about here, so let's dive right in. Starting with the root of the issue, the northern spotted owl is facing near extinction.
That's right. Since 1995, the spotted owl population has seen huge decreases, anywhere from 50 to 75%. But in BC, we're closer to extinction than is comfortable to admit. As of right now, only one wild-born spotted owl is believed to live in our forests.
And these owls aren't just any old bird either. Spotted owls serve a necessary role in managing small rodent populations in our forests, and because they require a biodiverse habitat, they also serve as indication of a healthy forest.
The owls are also incredibly valued by the Spuzum Nation, whose land was home to dozens of these birds not too long ago, including the current sole surviving wild-born owl. The spotted owl holds deep spiritual value and is regarded as the messenger between this world and the spirit world.
Now, this threat of extinction is obviously not something that came out of nowhere. In fact, the spotted owl has been listed federally as endangered since 1986. The province even established a breeding program back in 2007 to prevent the owl's extinction. So, what gives? Why are populations still dwindling?
I can't say there's a single concrete answer to that, but if we look at the whole picture, the problem lies in the logging of old-growth forests, more specifically in the Fraser Canyon, where the owls would typically be found.
We've gone from whole clusters of intact valleys now to just remnant stands remaining, and that is what has caused the steep decline in spotted owl numbers.
Joe Foy is just one of many individuals working to prevent the owl's extinction. A protected areas campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, Joe spent this past summer in the Fraser Canyon to experience firsthand why the spotted owls are going extinct.
And I had gotten maps, our organization had gotten maps, where BC had issued logging permits. So we were able to overlap those recently issued logging permits with federally mapped critical habitat. And so I spent the summer photographing active logging operations in old forests mapped by the federal government as critical habitat.
Environmental groups have been criticizing the lack of consistency when it comes to what each government aims to prioritize. On one hand, we've got the federal government, who has mapped out protected areas in order for the owls to have a chance at recovery. And on the other, we've got the provincial government, who has approved logging in these same areas. Okay, now that we know a bit about one of the major reasons the spotted owl is going extinct, let's dive into what is being done to stop this from happening, and how all that led to a judicial review of the Environment Minister on Wednesday.
There is a ton of background and history to the legal proceedings of this situation, but for the sake of simplicity, let's start with the petition submitted back in October of 2022.
This petition was written up by the Wilderness Committee and their legal representation, EcoJustice, and sent off to the Federal Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault. The overall goal of this petition was to get an emergency order issued.
Unless you're a legal policy fanatic, you probably have no idea what an emergency order is, so here's a quick rundown. An emergency order is a general term and refers to ordering a province to adhere to a certain law or act on an immediate basis. Typically, it's used when the federal government finds risk to human or animal life, and it overrides the authority of a province in order to prevent that risk.
In this scenario, an emergency order would be issued under Canada's Species at Risk Act, otherwise known as SARA. This would have stopped the province from allowing 2,500 hectares of necessary habitat from being logged.
But for an emergency order to be issued, i.e. acted on, it requires a bit of a process, is that right?
That's exactly right. It's not as simple as it may seem, and also not as effective as one may think. for an emergency order to be issued, it first needs to be recommended to the cabinet, who then have the right to approve it or not.
Let's jump to February of 2023. At this time, Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault confirms he has indeed received the petition and has determined that, yes, ongoing logging in the area is putting the survival of the spotted owl at risk.
This is an opinion he forms based on the petitioner's evidence. He then publicly communicated that opinion back to the Wilderness Committee and stated he intends on recommending an emergency order to the cabinet.
Now, as silly as that may seem to have to reiterate, it's actually one of the most important pieces to this story and in this case.
Under the Species at Risk Act, Guilbeault has the obligation to make a recommendation for an emergency order if he believes there is a threat to the survival of the species.
Which, I mean, makes sense. If it's an emergency, why wouldn't you act urgently? No point in issuing an emergency order if it isn't urgent, you know what I mean?
Right, exactly. And not only does he not immediately make the recommendation in February, he doesn't make it in March or in April or in May or June.
And this goes on for several months, but let's pause in June for a second, because that's when things really start ramping up. Jocelyn, what happens come June?
Well, at that point, the Wilderness Committee and Eco-Justice are not pleased with the lack of timely action and decide to follow through with filing a judicial review against the Environment Minister.
So now we know that was about an 8-month delay from coming to this opinion that there was logging that was going to happen this year in 2023 that was going to threaten the recovery of the species, to making the recommendation at the end of September, asking the court to determine whether that delay is something that is reasonable and allowed under the Species at Risk Act.
That was Andra Azevedo, one of the lawyers for Eco-Justice representing the Wilderness Committee in this case.
By filing this, the aim was to, as Andra says, determine whether or not Guilbeault was allowed to wait so long, but also to speed up the process of this order being recommended, which would hopefully help Cabinet to recognize the urgency in saving the spotted owl.
Before we jump to September, as she mentioned, let's first look at July. Jocelyn, what happened in July?
Well, the knowledge of the Environment Minister's plans were obviously not a secret, right? This was public knowledge at this point. The thing with actually issuing an emergency order is it takes away the authority of the provincial government, which obviously provincial officials are not the biggest fan of.
Another factor is how this emergency order would impact other elements of the equation, such as the logging industry. Our province relies on the economic boost from logging, so I think it's fair to say the province would do nearly everything to avoid having the emergency order issued.
And that's kind of what happened. I mean, I wouldn't say they did everything in their power to stop it because that would be a bit excessive, but by July, the provincial government was said to be lobbying to discourage the federal cabinet from approving the order.
Now, bear in mind, Minister Guilbeault hasn't even made the recommendation for the emergency order. Roughly 5 months have gone by at this point, and it's given the provincial government enough time to prepare.
And skipping to September, it seems the province was successful in that. On September 26th, Minister Guilbeault finally makes the recommendation, and by October 5th, it's rejected by the federal cabinet.
And you're probably thinking, well, that's the end of that, right? The recommendation was made and they said no. What more is the judicial review going to accomplish?
So before we get into the details of the judicial review, let's look at why our Federal Species at Risk Act is deemed so controversial.
I mean, we could really go on about this topic if we wanted to, but instead, let's hear from the experts.
The way our law is written is that the federal minister takes a recommendation for an emergency order to cabinet, and cabinet can say no. Groups, citizens, individuals, or organized groups make all this effort within a law that can be turned off without any explanation.
I think the problem is that the way the Species at Risk Act has been set up is, or at least how the federal government has applied the Species at Risk Act, is that it's allowed them to just wait rather than taking more proactive approaches to actually, for Environment Canada, let's say, to go out and actually look and try and assess whether there's imminent threats without necessarily needing to receive these kind of urgent letters from members of the public.
Sonia, let's summarize what we've learned so far.
Okay.
BC's northern spotted owl is endangered. Only one wild owl remains.
Right. And so Eco-Justice and the Wilderness Committee go to the Environment Minister and say, hey, we gotta permanently prevent any logging from going through here, because if not, the species is gonna die off.
The environment minister agrees. He's like, yeah, no, you're right. I'm going to recommend an emergency order. And then he waits 8 months to do so. Eco-Justice and the committee are like, hold on, you can't just wait several months. We're filing a judicial review to speed things up.
And then by the time the recommendation comes through, the province has gathered their resources and lobbied to the cabinet. Whether or not that had any deciding factor, the federal cabinet then rejects the order.
So why go through a judicial review?
So that's pretty typical of how these emergency orders have happened. Like, even just to get to an emergency order recommendation often involves some kind of legal action. And then, yes, in the few cases that there's been actual orders made, it's also been often always the result of cases that have kind of led to that.
Historically, as Andrew says, fighting this process in court is the most effective way of getting adequate protections. Having an emergency order even recommended, let alone issued under SARA, is nearly unheard of.
In the 20 years of SARA's existence, the only 2 emergency orders issued, one for the western chorus frog and one for the sage grouse, both involved a judicial review to get the ball rolling.
Which is where we are now. We can't say for sure how this will play out, but in the meantime, the Wilderness Committee and Eco-Justice plan to continue fighting to save the habitat and the existence of the northern spotted owl.
We reached out to Environment and Climate Change Canada, who in a written statement says the federal government acknowledges the concerns and is working closely with its partners to ensure that a suite of measures to support spotted owl recovery are implemented.
They also stated the minister fulfilled his obligations under SARA and that they will not be issuing an emergency order at this time.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Into the Wild, and be sure to join us next time. I'm Jocelyn Chappelle.
And I'm Sonia Kutenbauer. Thank you for listening.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikki-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikki-King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
From the broadcast center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to 1680 The Crow. I'm your host, Liam Higgs, and this is your 1230 news update. Let's get right into it with some local news. We have some more news on the Hazel Trembath School that burnt down earlier last week, or nearly 2 weeks ago, sorry. The RCMP says it will take months to investigate the suspicious blaze at Hazel Trembath Elementary School. Police are urging those who know anything about the fire or those who are responsible to come forward and speak to police. Speaking of police in Vancouver say they have arrested 2 people and proceeded with search warrants at the Offices of Drug User Liberation Front. Solicitor General Mike Farnworth supports the arrests following a police investigation. He says the government canceled the contract that saw Vancouver Coastal Health provide funding to the Drug User Liberation Front Society.
Yes, people who engage in breaking the law can expect there to be consequences. As police have said, they support progressive policies. They recognize the toxic drug crisis, but at the same time, people who engage in illegal activity, particularly in this case, the contract was for the testing of drugs, not for purchasing of illegal drugs.
Opposition BC United leader Kevin Falcone accused the government and Legislature today of supporting a group with taxpayer dollars that put police and the public at risk by buying illegal drugs from organized crime. Ontario's high school teachers are now trying to get a new contract as bargaining has concluded with the union unable to reach a negotiated deal with the province. Education Minister Stefan Liche says a number of non-monetary were agreed to at the table before the arbiter takes over.
Salaries was not an issue where we were able to agree, and thus that's going to go to interest arbitration. But there actually was a reduction in the number of items going to interest arbitration. That's a good thing. It demonstrates that we can work together to voluntarily negotiate agreements on various provisions.
The 3 other major teacher unions have so far rejected the idea of using arbitration. Peter Nygaard is testifying in his own defense for a second day at his sexual assault trial in Toronto. The 82-year-old former fashion mogul is accused of using his position to lure women and girls. Canadian press reporter Sonia Puzic explains Nygaard's mood on the stand.
When he talked about his how he built his business and how his career expanded in the fashion industry, Nygaard seemed to be in a quite positive mood, and he even made some jokes at times.
Nygaard has pleaded not guilty to 5 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of forcible confinement. New details are coming out about a suspect in the main shooting. Reporter Jackie Quinn from the Associated Press has more.
This is someone that should not be approached.
State Police Colonel William Ross says the suspect is a weapons instructor and a U.S. Army reservist, 40-year-old Robert Card. He says 18 victims are dead after shootings at 2 locations, and no motive is being offered at this time. But a U.S. official, on condition of anonymity, tells the Associated Press Card had been taken for an evaluation in mid-July after commanders in his unit were concerned about his acting erratically while the unit was training at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Now, residents in southern Maine are sheltering in place. Governor Janet Mills.
No words can truly or fully measure the grief of many people today.
I'm Jackie Quinn.
And now some music. The last new Beatles song is coming out next week, 60 years after Beatlemania rocked the world. Artificial intelligence has enabled the release, which is titled Now and Then. Reporter R.G. Soroletta has the latest.
The same batch of John Lennon demos that led to the 1996 songs Real Love and Free as a Bird formed the foundation of the new song Now and Then. Film director Peter Jackson used artificial intelligence to isolate Lennon's vocal. Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr finished the track with a guitar part from the late George Harrison.
Love, love me do.
Now and Then comes out Thursday, paired with the song Love Me Do, the first Beatles single released in England in 1962. A 12-minute film about the new recording will come out on Wednesday. I'm R.G. Zaraletta.
The first Beatles song debuted in 1962. Band members Paul McCartney and Ringo are currently in their 80s. Thanks, everyone, for joining me this morning. I'm Liam Higgs, and that was your 1230 News Update.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikki-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikki-King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.